Chapter 682. It's been a while too. A few moments prior. Rumble, rumble. The rumbling coming from the distance still managed to reach the remnant south, causing large waves to form around the port as the ships were capsized over, and large waves shot towards the city. Stay back. Stay under the protection of the Great Barrier. Despite the situation looking grim, and aside from the initial issues, the situation was rather tame within Varelith. A massive dome, raised by the emissaries of the Church of the Goddess of Light, enclosed the entire city, shielding it from the towering waves crashing down in the distant, suffocating pressure pressing in. This lasted quite a while before eventually stopping. And just as everyone thought that the situation was over, the rumbling resumed. This time, more frantic and powerful than before. Rumble, rumble. The pressure coming out this time was enough to give chills to everyone present. Careful, keep the dome steady. Even the massive dome that covered the entire city started to falter. What the hell is happening over there? Do you think the Chancellor is going to be okay? Having been brought to the remnant south, the cadets were naturally all exposed to the current situation. And yet, the only thing they could do was stand behind the dome while hoping that nothing bad happened. Generally, however, everyone was quite calm. Having experienced far worse in the past, they were able to handle themselves in such a situation. However, not everyone was calm. It's there. I'm sure it's there. A pair of gray eyes remained fixed over the distance, where the pressure was coming from, as his fists clenched tightly. Every part of his body screamed that whatever he was looking for was right there. His instincts were telling him that. However, he wasn't sure of what he was looking for. He had asked the Chancellor to bring him with her, but in the end, she still ended up rejecting his offer. And Leon couldn't blame her for that. Just a wisp of the pressure from the distance was enough to make it extremely hard for him to breathe. He couldn't imagine how bad the situation would be if he were closer. But still, a large part of Leon really wanted to be there. Look, all of a sudden, Aoife pointed towards the distance. Right where an enormous black pillar pierced the sky directly. What the hell is that? I don't have a good feeling about the situation. She wasn't the only one to have noticed the pillar. It wasn't long before everyone within the city noticed the pillar as the rumbling grew even more pronounced, shaking the entire city to the core. Rumble. Screams pierced through the surroundings as a lot of people lost their footing. Thankfully, Leon and the others had been ready from the start, all of them standing steady as they stared towards the distance with a grim expression. Just when they thought that the situation was about to turn for the worse, something unexpected happened. Silence. The world fell into absolute silence, and everything came to a halt, as if everything had frozen in time. It almost felt like the situation had never started in the first place. If not for the destruction that took place, nobody would have noticed. And then, swoosh, a figure suddenly appeared before the cadets, surprising them on the spot, as some even yelped in surprise. Thankfully, they appeared to be the only ones to notice her presence as she looked at the cadets to make sure that they were all present. Then, as a silence started to settle around them, Aoife spoke, turning towards the Chancellor. Did you? Yes. Delilah didn't even try to deny it, staring at her hand, which was trembling. Slightly. I got rid of the beast. Everything was still a blur to her. She couldn't quite recall what had happened. The only thing she knew was that the moment she came into contact with the monster's body, she lost control over her body as it suddenly turned weak. She was then swallowed by the monster, bringing her to this dark place that appeared to suck the very energy out of her. The situation was rather grim, but even in such a situation, Delilah didn't panic. She sat in the dark space, waiting for the right opportunity to strike as she gathered all of her energy. And then, the opportunity presented itself rather quickly to her. She noticed a slight opening, a faint weakness in the monster's body, and she directly exploited it, killing it in one go with her most powerful attack. It was all over now. She was tired, extremely tired, to the point where she felt like she'd faint at any second. However, she remained standing. The last thing she could do was show weakness in front of the cadets. In their eyes, she was an invincible figure. She couldn't afford to break that image to them. But more than anything, her mind was foggy. A strange and foreign power was roaming within her body, slowly seeping into every part of it as she felt the power slowly starting to assimilate with her. Delilah understood that she was starting to undergo a change. The change brought a certain pain to her mind. But in spite of the pain, she started to remember something. A certain someone, a certain name, and her expression finally changed. He's the reason why I'm here. Splash. Water splashed against the bow of the ship as it cut through the water and navigated through the calm waters of the Crimson Sea. I stood in silence, taking in the view and quietly admiring the scene before me. This was the first time in a very long time that I felt somewhat at peace. My eye was still hurting from the relic, but it was at a manageable level. It wasn't strong enough that I couldn't ignore it. I'd be worried if that were the case. The thing I'm more spooked about is how Lazarus simply gauged the eye out like that, without even an ounce of hesitation. Granted, the situation warranted such action, but thinking back to when Lazarus plunged his hand into the eye socket and tore the eye out still sent shivers down my spine. Single quote. While it isn't impossible for someone to have a new eye with the magic in this world, I still feel the action is a bit extreme. Thankfully, it all worked out in the end, and I managed to collect the relic and get rid of the primordial's influence at the same time. If there was one thing that bothered me, however, it was Silas. Because I had been so preoccupied with what was happening with the primordial one and Delilah, I wasn't able to pay attention to him at all, and as a result, he managed to escape before I could get to him. I wanted to give chase, get rid of a possible threat, but in the end, I gave up. I was exhausted, and Silas wasn't by any means weak. Even Anne had trouble handling him. While I didn't think for one second the two of us wouldn't be able to defeat him, it would still require energy. Energy that I simply didn't have. In the end, this is the best decision that we can make. And I really am too tired at the moment. It was taking about almost everything I had to keep myself from passing out on the spot. The only reason why I still held on for now was that we were still not out of danger just yet. The Crimson Sea was anything but friendly, and with the possibility of Silas appearing at any second, I had no choice but to remain vigilant. And so I did. Despite my drooping eyes and faltering mind, I remained awake, waiting for the ship as it slowly made its way back into the remnant south. The entire time, the ship was quiet, without anyone making any sound. The only sound was the steady splash of water as the ship cut through the sea. Everyone remained silent, eyes scanning the surroundings with vigilance. Maybe it was the weight of the lives lost, or maybe it was caution, but even as we finally reached the remnant south, not a single word was spoken. It was only when we reached the outskirts of Varelith that Anne finally approached me, her eyes squinting as she looked towards the distant city. "We're here. Quote. Yes, we are. The city didn't look nearly as bad as I originally expected it to be. While the port was indeed broken and shattered in several areas, the city looked fine. Granted, the entire sequence of events occurred not very close to here, but the shocks and pressure alone from the monster were quite formidable. I wouldn't have been surprised if it had reached the city and even caused some serious damage to it, but looking at the massive dome that surrounded the entire city, it looked like I had severely underestimated the defensive capabilities of the city. In the end, the goddess also resides within the city. It shouldn't come as a surprise that the city is still standing. I was sure that she wouldn't allow the city to crumble with her present. Perhaps, if not for her injuries, she would have probably been able to take care of the monster herself. We've docked. As Anne's words reached my ears again, I looked down to see the ship docked at the port, and without hesitation, I jumped down onto the ground. Finally, some ground. It almost felt like forever. In fact, after this, I really didn't want to go back to the sea for a very long time. What next? As Anaz came next to me, staring towards the dome that stood not far from us, I pondered for a moment before touching my eye. Quote. We should get into the city and get some rest. We can figure everything else later. I'm sure this is what most of the people here want to do. Looking back and seeing how tired everyone looked, I figured that this was the best decision. Anne also appeared to be of the same opinion, and just like that, we entered the remnant south and found an inn to stay. Clank. The moment I entered my room, the first thing I did was slump onto the bed before closing my eyes. Slowly clenching my fist, I thought about everything that had happened and pressed my lips together. Lazarus. He was nothing but another character that I had played. An act of some sort. And yet, he turned out to be the most significant character I played. And my last and final act. From this moment forward, it was going to be just me, and me only. No more acting. There was no longer a need for me to do so. Chapter 683. It's been a while 3. I didn't know how long I slept for. The only thing I knew was that I woke up feeling like shit. My entire body was sore all over, and my eye. It hurt like hell. It felt like a smoldering rock had been lodged where my eye used to be. The fact that I didn't wake up despite the pain was a miracle in itself. Guess I was that tired. Rubbing my face, I pushed myself out of bed and walked to the bathroom, where the mirror greeted me with a hollow stare. So not only did I feel like shit, I also looked like shit. It'll probably take a little bit for me to get used to this appearance again. No, but most importantly, squinting my eyes, I leaned my head closer towards the mirror and stared at my eye. What the? Though subtle, the color of my right eye had changed. If I looked closely, I could see faint traces of white swirling within it. I felt a little creeped out by the sight. Thankfully, it wasn't extremely noticeable. However, it was clear that it was still growing. I felt that it wouldn't be long before my entire pupil turned white. The thought of having one white eye and one hazel eye made me feel uneasy. It would look strange, maybe, even a little creepy. Why am I even bothered with something like this? Letting out a quiet sigh, I turned away from the mirror and made my way back to the main room. It was modest in size, furnished with nothing more than a single bed and a desk. The curtains were drawn shut, casting the room in a dim gloom. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out a small container filled with a thick, black liquid. The moment I did, a primal, terrifying pressure swept through the room, pressing down on everything like an invisible weight. Quote ellipsis dot exclamation mark question mark quote. If not for the fact that I was quick to hide the pressure, I was afraid of attracting the attention of everyone within the city. Looking around, I bitterly smiled. I don't know if this is the best place to do this, but I don't think I can wait much longer. I planned on merging with the bone. Right here and right now. I felt that I had no choice but to do so. It was as if I were carrying some sort of bomb that was ready to explode at any given second. Perhaps I was being extremely paranoid, but I didn't want to delay the matter. I was also incredibly excited to do so. This was a primordial rank bone. The power that it contained was extremely massive, and I couldn't wait to acquire a new skill. Just what sort of skill would I acquire from a primordial ranked bone? I salivated at the thought, and just as I was about to reach for the bone in order to merge with it, a figure appeared. Wait, stopping, I turned my head to see the figure of a certain owl. It was staring at the bone with deep apprehension. Now that I think about it, Almighty was also present back when Lazarus was undergoing all of the torture. However, it probably doesn't remember anything. The only one that remembered everything was Pebble. Unlike Almighty, Pebble was the only one that was still linked with my soul. It was the only one that had actually seen all of Lazarus's regressions. Wobbles was also unaware. What's wrong? Is there something wrong with the bone? Did I? No, it's not that. Almighty shook its head as its piercing eyes fell on the viscous liquid ahead. It looked to be closely analyzing it before eventually looking back at me. Its expression looked a little serious as it looked at me. The soul within the bone is extremely weak. Weak soul. Wait, did that mean there's likely not going to be a will once you merge with the blood? It looks like the woman from before completely erased Zayahrl's existence from the world, eliminating even its will. The faint soul that I'm feeling in the bone is extremely weak. Even if you do try to form a will, it will very likely not work. Perhaps in the future, but that is also not likely. So it was this. I didn't really know how to feel about this piece of news. Was I sad? Was I angry? I wasn't sure. In all honesty, I hadn't even thought about the will. All I thought about was fusing with the bone and gaining a new skill. Wait, a thought suddenly occurred to me. If there's no will, does that mean that merging with the bone will be a lot easier? I thought back to the time when I tried to merge with Pebble's bone. It took several months in order to battle its will before being able to fully merge with it. In this case, if the will was so weak that it was practically gone, wouldn't merging with it become a lot easier? That should be the case. Almighty's words were all that I needed to hear in order to confirm the thoughts, and my heart couldn't help but leap in excitement as I immediately squeezed my hand and channeled my mana into the bone. While it's a pity that there might be no will, the fact that it's easier to merge with it's good. It'll save me so much trouble. Boom! A powerful pulse suddenly swept the entire room, knocking the curtains away and sending the chair onto the floor, alongside the table. Thankfully, I had restricted all of the noise and as such wasn't worried about attracting unnecessary attention. But the pressure that was coming out of the bone was extremely powerful. It was so powerful that for a moment, the restriction that I had set up almost shattered. Putting even more pressure on my hand, I circulated my mana even more rapidly and watched as the bone dug its way into my skin, crawling beneath its surface like some sort of worm before penetrating my muscles and entering my insides. The process didn't hurt much, but the visual stimulus was a little hard for me to take. Focus, focus, focus. I had to remind myself over and over again to remain focused. This next part was going to be integral for me as I was dealing with a primordial rank bone. This was going to be the strongest bone that I had ever encountered, and while it no longer had a will, the power that was contained within the simple bone was still not something trivial. Gritting my teeth, I focused all of my attention on the bone that was streaming through my body. I was currently in no control of it. I was still unsure of which bone it would end up replacing. The only thing I could do at the moment was endure the pain that I was currently going through. Thankfully, the pain was something that I could bear. The only issue was the massive pressure that came alongside the bone. It made my chest feel incredibly heavy as my hands and body started to tremble uncontrollably. For a moment, I nearly lost concentration as a result of the situation. It was vital for me to remain focused. The moment I lost concentration, there was a high chance that the built-up pressure would suddenly explode alongside my body. The sight, it would certainly not be a pretty one. Focus, focus. Beads of sweat formed at the side of my forehead, dripping onto the floor before suddenly sizzling and fading into water vapor. Sizzle, sizzle. More and more water vapor started to form around the room, causing the place to turn into some sort of sauna. Breathing started to become more difficult, and my concentration nearly slipped a couple of times. However, I remained focused on my task. I was nearly done. I just had to focus for a little bit longer, and everything was going to be okay. Gritting my teeth even harder than before, I felt the viscous bone finally latch onto a certain part of my body as both my eyes flared open. Now, I knew that this was the most vital step. Without wasting a single second, I channeled all my mana in the direction of the bone, forcing it to remain fixed on the spot. Quote, ! This time, I truly felt the pain. If I had been able to endure it before, this time was different. The pain was sharp and vivid, stealing the air from my lungs. My mouth opened instinctively, but no sound escaped. For a fleeting moment, my mind went completely blank. Every thought was wiped away by the sheer intensity of the pain. Thud, even as I felt my body fall onto the floor as it started to convulse, I found myself unable to think properly as I started to thrash around the floor, gripping onto anything that I could. Bang, bang, I heard the sound of several things smashing and breaking, but it was all quite faint and muffled. I continued to struggle, on the floor, gripping and reaching for anything that could help me. However, the more that I struggled, the more difficult things became for me. Darkness took over my vision shortly after that. By the time I woke up again, I found myself lying on the floor as I blankly stared at the ceiling above me. Ha! A sharp throb pulsed through my head as I fought to keep my eyes open. Strange dots danced across my vision, and every movement felt disjointed. Out of sync, my head felt incredibly light, as if it might float away at any moment. Still, forcing myself up, I blinked a couple of times and tried to regain my bearings. When I did, I finally saw the state of the room. It was bad to the point where it couldn't even be called a mess. The bed was broken in half. The window was shattered. The chair, where the hell was the chair? All I saw were scattered pieces of wood. Thankfully, everything isn't very expensive. Otherwise, holding onto my head, I forced myself up and staggered towards the bathroom, the only place that was still intact within the room. Slowly moving towards the sink and placing both of my hands on it to rest, I raised my head up to stare at myself. It was in that moment that I saw it. My eyes. One red, one white. I opened my mouth, closing it shortly after as information started to flood into my mind, momentarily halting me in place. Eye of existence.